Uh, Alexis is actually the Director of Education at Sports Integrity Australia. She leads a team to develop innovative education programs on a range of sports integrity threats that not only includes doping, but also match fixing, child safeguarding, and abuse in sport. She has a master's degree in bioethics from University of Sydney, as well as a bachelor degree in communications, coupling a passion for communicating complex information in simple and engaging ways. That's what we want, with an interest in understanding why and how people make decisions. Alexis has worked in Australia's NADO for 8 years, which is the Sports Integrity Australia, and previously worked in science communication roles for the Chief Scientist of Australia in a range of national scientific institutions. She's a regular collaborator with other ADOs and is a member, chair, and trainer in WADA's Global Learning Development Framework program. So we got someone who is very well versed. Now, before she starts, we are going to play a video. Some of you who have come to the Global Education Conference had a chance to see this video. For those who have not, this is a great opportunity to watch this video. It's a very powerful message going in. So I think you got to start from the beginning.
My passion out of life went, my purpose out of life went. And, you know, a lot of people could say, oh, it's just a sport, you know, just do something else. But that link with my dad, yeah, I had to rebuild my life. Running's important to me, firstly because of my dad. That connection that I get every time I go for a run, and to feel him near me, and wanting to achieve for him as well, I guess. I just don't see it not being in my life or a part of who I am. I listed all my supplements that I was taking, you know, did the urine test, the blood test, and okay, see you later, not a problem. Like, it was just a regular routine, you know, out of competition testing for me, yep. I went into shock straight away. I could see, I could hear, but I couldn't speak, so I couldn't communicate to people, and they were trying to get things out of me, and I was in my head going, I can see you, I can hear you, but I just can't, I can't converse with you. So I was taken to hospital in an ambulance. They wouldn't release me until I could converse with them. And eventually I got a couple of words out, and then I was released into my brother's care for constant supervision for 24 hours, yeah. The investigators came up and did an interview, the ASADA investigators. Prior to them coming up, they asked for me to photograph all my supplements that I had listed on my form, and a picture of the ingredient panel, which I did. And I vividly remember the investigator pushing over one of the pictures and asking me to read out an ingredient. And I looked over and I said, Nardinia fruit extract. And at that point he said, so that our scientists at ASADA have determined that is actually hyginamine. And I just went, I didn't even know. I just didn't even know what to say. I didn't even know what to say, yeah. I was about to take a good 6 weeks off, travel over to London and just immerse myself in training so I could be that full-time athlete, you know, to try to qualify for the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. And then it was taken away, and I'll never know. What I was struggling with was being an elite athlete but not having the lifestyle to be able to live like one. And that's when I was naive and got drawn into those supplement companies. As you can see, it's still really raw. Yeah, but I hope one day in the future that I can, just accept that that was a part of my life. But yeah, I think it'll always be there, hanging over my head. It's not just the athlete that suffers, it's everyone around them. Everyone around them. So yeah, if I could just reach out to, just even one athlete to just go, oh, I probably don't really need to be taking what I'm taking, then that's my job done.
Okay, great.
My passion out of life went, my
Vivian,
purpose.
no, sorry. We will stop there. I think it is a wonderful, powerful video. And the reason behind is there is always a lot of inadvertent, when I say a lot, predominantly a good number of anti-doping doping cases in Southeast Asia has been due to inadvertent doping. All right. So without further ado, I think it is a powerful message. If you wish to have that video, there is a link following which we will ask you to do a simple survey and we will send you the link, which is in YouTube. All right. And if you want to use it, by all means, I think it's okay, right? Alexis, yeah. So without further ado, I leave it to Alexis to give a presentation. Yeah, Alexis, all yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Govi, so much for the invitation to be here, and thank you, everyone, for coming along. I think one of the best parts of working in anti-doping is that you get to work with a beautiful community of people who are all really passionate about the same cause that you are all around the world. So I feel really privileged to be speaking to you and to meet you all today, so thank you. I still get a little bit teary when I watch Cassie's video. She was a really powerful athlete, really courageous, who came forward to work with us and tell her story. And I think it just shows how important all of our work in this area is, because we all know that when athletes test positive, they can go through a range of mental health impacts, and it can, ruin their lives. Most athletes that we deal with, say that the mental health impact is really, really big. So I think our work collaboratively to try to stop as many supplement cases as we can is critical. And I know Cassie at the Global Education Conference actually said that, it can save people's lives, such as kind of the importance of our work in this supplement space. So thank you to Cassie, and thank you again. So today I'm going to be talking all about our battle in Australia with supplements, because we had a really big problem, and we'll talk about that. So I'll talk about how big the problem was, what we did to try to tackle it, and what we've done and what's actually been successful in reducing the number of positives that we've had here in Australia. So I'm just going to hopefully share my screen and some slides. Hang on a second. Okay. Govi, I'll just ask you to tell me a yes that you can see them.
Yes, yeah, good.
Fabulous. All right, well, we'll start with the problem and the size of it that we had in Australia. So this was back in, we'll go back to 2016. So that's, 5 or 6 years ago. We had about a third of our cases of positive tests were coming from supplement ingredients. And we calculated that to be about one athlete per month was testing positive to a supplement. The most common ingredients that we were finding in the supplements were hegetamine and alkylamines, which are things like DMAA or DMBA. The problem that we saw was mainly at that sub-elite level, so really similar to Cassie. So these are people who are Sub-elite athletes, they're not quite at the elite level where they have a nutritionist and a dietitian and a coach to support them in their decision making. Usually they're kind of training, but they've also got full-time jobs. They've also might have, part-time work. They're trying to fit everything in. They're exhausted. They've got busy days, and they feel like they need supplements to help them have the energy to train. Was really part of the problem. But most importantly, we found that these athletes didn't have any intent to dope. These aren't people who were going out of their way to try to do the wrong thing. They generally just, believed the supplement marketing and the hype around them, and so they were taking them. So we realized we had a problem when we had 30% of our cases that had supplements. So then we did a bit of an internal review of each one of those AAFs that we'd had, and we came up that there were 28 supplement products that were actually involved. And what we found were that none of them had been batch tested. None of them were legal medicines. Most commonly, we found that athletes were testing positive to pre-workout supplements. So the things that they had before training to give them that bit of energy so they could train harder. And we found that 2/3 of them, and this is quite scary, actually had the banned ingredient written on the label. So in 2/3 of cases, the information was actually there. Athletes just didn't know how.
Alexis, your slide is not moving. Have you moved your slides already?
You should be on slide 2.
No,
which
it's
has
still on
28.
slide number 1, supplement 0.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Hang on. Can you see them now?
Yeah,
No?
now we find the problem. Yeah, the second slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize. I'll stay like this then, just to be a bit easier. So that's the 29% is the third of cases that we had from supplements that I was talking about. And this was the review that we did of the 28 supplements that were involved. And you can see that one, Gobi, that's okay?
Yep.
Great. So I was saying that around 2/3 of the supplements that athletes are tested positive to had the ingredient actually written on the label, but half of those were actually written under a different name. So for example, Cassie tested positive to hegetamine, but it wasn't listed as hegetamine on the label. It was actually written as Nandina domestica, which was a fruit extract. So if you were to Google hegetamine, for example, or put it into Global Draw, it would have come up as banned. But because it was in as Nandina domestica, there was no real information on it to tell her that it was prohibited. So in her case, she had done the checks, and unfortunately, there was no information on Nandina domestica, and she chose to take the product anyway. So really concerning. The last thing that we did was we looked at the actual marketplace in Australia. So, we looked inside at all of the positives that we were having, and then we said, all right, what's actually happening in the shops where Australians are buying supplements from? So we commissioned a survey, and we specifically looked at pre-workouts and fat burners because they were the things that we had found most risky. And we did. So basically we got into shops, we pulled things off the shops, and then we sent them off to be tested for ingredients. Some we randomly selected, so just random fat burners and pre-workouts that we could find. And some were actually targeted, we called a targeted product. That was because they had a banned ingredient on the label. So of the randomly selected ones, we had 20 of 70, which is terrifying. So just under 1/3 of products that we had randomly selected off Australian shelves had a banned ingredient, and around 80% of those targeted products contained a banned ingredient. And what that told us as an organisation was that the marketplace in Australia was really dangerous. There was a lot of risk out there for athletes, and it became a bit of a luck of the draw in terms of which supplement you had, if it had a banned ingredient or not. So the outcome that we had, so over the last 5 years, we made supplements a real priority for us. And we tried a whole bunch of things that I'll talk about today, so what we actually did to tackle it. But last year we were doing our evaluation for WADA, for the International Standard of Education. And one of the things that we monitor each year is the number of athletes testing positive. So we sent off the request to our intelligence team and said, hey, how many do we have this year? And they wrote back and said 0. So you can only imagine my pure delight and excitement when I got that in my inbox. And they made me this beautiful graph, which shows our journey over the last 5 years. So you can see when we first started in 2016-17, we had 17 athletes a year test positive. And then it's gradually decreased over time to the point where we had 0 last year. And we're pretty sure that's 0 for the first time in a decade that we would have had that result. So very excited, but we are naturally cautious and a bit pessimistic. So we thought, oh, maybe it was just because testing has gone down because of COVID. Obviously, there's going to be less positive tests during COVID. And so we got them to create another graph. And as you can see, our testing levels did drop during COVID, but not too much. And they're certainly back to normal now. So it wasn't just a reduction due to the number of tests. And so, like I said, there are lots of things that we did along the way. It really has been a 5-year journey. So, unfortunately, when I'm sharing slides like this, I lose all my beautiful animations. So what I'm going to walk you through today is this kind of pathway. So in 2017, we changed our messaging around how we spoke about supplements. In 2018, we introduced a new mobile app. In 2019, we managed to have the legislation around supplements changed in Australia. And then in 2020, we started introducing the voice of athletes who had tested positive. So people like Cassie into our education program. So this probably gives you the structure, albeit a bit messily, of what we're going to talk about today, which are, these are all the steps that we have taken over the last 5 years to go from 17 to 0. So I'll start with the change in messaging. So previously, when we spoke about supplements, we always just told athletes, do not take them. They're too risky. The only advice that we can give you is not to take them because, we've just seen all the survey results. We've seen lots of athletes testing positive. But that meant that when an athlete called us for advice around a supplement, so they might say, hey, I've got this pre-workout, or hey, I've got, this fat burner that I'm thinking of taking, all we would say to them was, don't take it. Now, the problem with that is that athletes thought we were completely unhelpful, completely irrelevant, and that we weren't there on their side, because to them, to athletes, they believed that they needed supplements and that they couldn't train without them. I think in Australia, there's certainly a culture where every athlete is using supplements. You've got athletes who are sponsored by supplement companies. Social media is littered with people talking about their supplement use. So we were seen as really out of touch with athletes. So what we did was move to an approach of what we call harm minimization. So if essentially what we changed our messaging from was don't take supplements to we still can't tell you a supplement is 100% safe, but if you choose to take them, these are the ways that you can reduce your risk. And that's when we started talking about batch testing, which I'll talk about in a second. And that sounds simple, just change your messaging, but actually we had to get our legal team on board, our testing team. It was a big deal to actually convince people in the organisation to take that little bit of risk and start giving athletes practical advice that might open the door for us being at risk. For example, if we had given advice that was incorrect, instead of just giving them nothing. So that change is really important. And what we did essentially was start promoting batch testing. So I'm sure you've all heard of batch testing companies. They take the supplements, screen them in a laboratory before they end up on the shelves. And in Australia, we only have 2 companies who operate within Australia in terms of their products are actually on the Australian shelves. So we also have, we know about NSF, for example, and I know that there's BC something in America. So there are other batch testing companies around the world, but in Australia, we decided that we would focus on these 2 because they were the ones who were actually operating here with Australian companies and getting products onto the market. So we started telling athletes that if you're going to take a supplement, you must make sure that it has one of these labels. You must make sure that it has been batch tested, and so began an education program about what batch testing is, how to look for the labels, what they were looking for. So that was really the messaging side of things. Now, the next step was, how do we move from just messaging into giving them a tool to actually help them put that messaging into practice? So we built a mobile app. Now, obviously athletes, kids these days live on their phones, so do many of us. So an app was considered to be better than making a website, for example. And so what we did was build this app to put the advice into actual tangible a tool. So the app actually includes a list of every single batch tested supplement which is sold in Australia. So if you're an athlete looking for a batch tested supplement, you can find all of those ones that are sold in Australia by opening our app. If you don't have the Sport Integrity app, I've put the QR code up on the screen so you can download it if you'd like, just to have a look. But so we work with HASTA and with Informed Sport, those two batch testing companies, and they send us their list of, these are the products that we have batch tested, in the last month or the last 3 months. And then we take that data and then we enter it in to the app. So athletes have a list of all the batch tested ones sold in Australia. You can sort of use it in 2 different ways. So on the screen there, you can see there's a toolbar. The top one says search by product, and the other one says check a supplement with our questionnaire. So the idea is that if you're an athlete who is looking to take a creatine powder, for example, or a protein powder, they can come to the app and they can find which ones are batch tested before they make their purchase. So then they know that they're buying a batch tested version. The other user scenario that we have is an athlete might already have a supplement that they might already have been using, and they want to check whether they should keep using it. So you can either search by product by typing in the name of your supplement. So for example, vitamin C or Musashi protein powder, and it will tell you if it has been batch tested or not. And if it hasn't been batch tested, that's when you can check the risk of it. So I'll walk you through the app briefly. So this is the list of supplements. So the second picture that you can see here, you have the headings that go across. So you've got all supplements, which is what it's listing at the moment. And then you have amino acids, creatine, and electrolytes. So this means it's athletes can search by the type of product. So if they want to take a creatine powder, it will show you only the creatine powders that have been batch tested. If you want to take a BCAA, ditto. And so you can see that it provides a list of all the supplements. And then the third picture is actually what you see if you click on one of these products. So if you click on the Body Science Hydroxy Burn, you get this third picture. And in that, it includes, these are all the batch numbers of that product which have been tested and their expiry date under each flavor. So we always tell athletes to make sure that the batch number on the bottle that they're looking at is the one in the app, and that the expiry date is correct. The other unique thing about the app is we get information, as I'm sure all of you do, about certain supplements which contain banned ingredients. And so we didn't want to keep that from athletes. So we had the choice of either publishing a list of supplements on our website that we know have a banned ingredient in them to help make sure athletes are aware. But we didn't want to do that because then people who genuinely did want to take a banned substance would know which products to go and buy. And that would be detrimental to their health. So what we did instead was include them in the app. So you only see them if you search for them. So OxyShred Hardcore, which is this picture on the right, we know that that one contains a banned ingredient because athletes have tested positive to it, and testing of it has shown that it contains a banned ingredient. So if you search for that product, it will come up with a warning that says it's extremely high risk. It contains a wider prohibited ingredient, do not use. So that is how the supplement list works. And Gobi, I can't see if there's any questions in there, but please interrupt me. If anybody has a question or wants to know anything, please, by all means, you don't have to wait till the end. I'll happily jump in. The other way, I mentioned that there was both the list of batch tested supplements, and then we also have the questionnaire. Now, this questionnaire has 9 questions that you walk through. So for example, if you take a supplement, I've got vitamin C here in front of me. The first question is to check whether it's been batch tested. This one hasn't, so you click no. The second question is asking whether it is a pre-workout or a weight loss product, because we know that they are the most risky. So for this one, I would say no. Does it contain more than one ingredient? And these are all risk factors that we've identified, and there's certain weightings that sit behind this questionnaire. So for example, also, have you checked the ingredients on Global Dro? Does the product claim to be approved by WADA, which is what we've seen on some supplement bottles, unfortunately? Does the product advertise, a secret formula, a proprietary blend, or a quick fix? Other warning signs: legal steroids, legal pro-hormones. Anything that has to say the word legal in it is generally a red flag for us. We've also included plant extracts as being a risk. And then the final question, number 9, is where we list some of those strange names that we see popping up on supplement labels to make sure athletes are actually checking them. And so once they answer those 9 questions, they will get a risk rating at the end. That will either be high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And that lets them make an informed decision about whether they want to use supplement. All good?
Good.
Fab. Okay, I'll keep going. So after this, I'll just take a quick break to have a glass of water. But so when we originally designed the app, we thought our target was we would have 1,000 people download it. We were aiming to get our entire Commonwealth Games team to download it. And if we did that, we thought that would be a win. What we've had, I think we had 10,000 or something in the first month. It was incredible. And now we have 65,000 athletes who have it on their phone. We get around 43,000 supplement checks every year, which I think equates to around 800 a week, or 100 and something a day, if you want to keep breaking it down. And the app actually lists 15,000 supplements in there, which again, that's the data that we get from HASTA and Inform Sport. So before I go, I'll just check if there's any questions on the app before I go on to talk about regulation. Looking good. All right, hang on. Okay, so the third dot point that I had on our beautiful graph was that we managed to change the regulation around how supplements are sold in Australia. This was a huge task for us. So what we wanted to do was basically have tighter regulations around supplements that's sold in Australia. So I mentioned that in Cassie's case, for example, ingredient lists didn't necessarily make sense or actually include the number or the type of ingredients that are in there. It was quite common for supplements to include things that weren't on the ingredient list at all, and we wanted to change that. And we wanted to try to get banned ingredients out of Australian supplements if we could. So we worked with our Therapeutic Goods Administration, and each of your countries will have a different organisation who works as part of the government, I imagine, to regulate medicines. So that was the Australian equivalent. Now in Australia, the challenge for us was that many supplements were categorised as foods. So they weren't categorised as medicines. They lived as in this kind of grey land where a supplement powder would be considered a food. Now, the best way to describe that is on lots of packaging in Australian foods, you might have something that says may contain nuts, which is basically our manufacturing standards aren't strict enough to make sure that somebody who cannot have nuts because they are anaphylactic can actually trust this product. So if you're anaphylactic or allergic to nuts, don't have this. That was the same sort of approach with supplements, may contain banned ingredients. It was a possibility that it could be in there because the manufacturing wasn't tight enough or wasn't controlled enough. So what we wanted, and the difference between foods and medicines is that medicines are controlled and regulated much more strongly than foods are. So what we wanted to do was get supplements from being foods and being regulated in the way that foods are to getting them regulated in the way that medicines were. And this is something that took about 12 to 18 months. But what we did manage to do was to get some supplements, not all of them, we couldn't get them all. We got some of them classified as medications instead of being foods, and therefore there's a lot more that supplement manufacturers need to do, and much more compliance and greater penalties if they do the wrong thing. So now any supplement which is in a pill, capsule or tablet form is now categorized as a medicine. So this means weight loss pills, which have been the bane of our existence. We had a lot of athletes test positive to them, are now categorized as medicine, which means that we need to know that they need to say exactly what's in them. You can't mess around. Any supplement that now contains a wider prohibited ingredient is now a medicine. So things like eugenomine, for example, aren't illegal in Australia, which is why they could still choose to put them in a supplement if they wanted. But if they do, they have to go through the medication approval route, which is extremely difficult, and it would obviously have to be well documented on there. And we also managed to get some substances, those alkymalanes, declared as poisons, which is a step up from being a medication, because it also makes it illegal to sell, buy, or possess. We've tried to create a little flowchart to explain how this works, but essentially we start at step 1 here, which is, does the product say anything about it being helpful in sport, helpful in exercise, or any other recreational activity? So if it mentions, if it wants to mention health in terms of it will help you train faster, it will improve energy for sport. If they want to use pictures of athletes in their advertising, then it ticks off the box to number 1. And the second check they have to do is, does it have a substance which is considered a poison, such as that DMAA stuff? And if yes, then it's a therapeutic good, not a food. And likewise, is it a wider prohibited ingredient? If yes, then it's a medication, not a food. And the last one is, even if it doesn't have a poison, even if it doesn't have a wider prohibited ingredient, is it a pill, tablet, or capsule? If yes, then a therapeutic good. So that captures even things like vitamins and minerals, if they want to associate themselves with sport or exercise in any way. So obviously there are a lot of supplement companies in Australia who were making supplements that were previously foods and now would be considered medicines. And so they had a couple of options. So one, they could change the claims, so they could make it nothing to do with, so in terms of the way that they market the product, they could change it so that they didn't mention sport or exercise or any recreational activity. They could actually change the ingredients. For example, they could get rid of eugenomine. Or if they were selling pills, they could change it, for example, to a powder. The other option is that they could register their product as a medication, and then they have to comply with a whole lot of other regulations, or they could withdraw the product from the market. So that was kind of the 3 steps. Now, obviously, this was a huge change, and it's had an enormous benefit in making the marketplace in Australia safer. But there are lots of steps that we have to do to get through there. You don't need to read all of those. Essentially, what you need to know is that we had to do a lot of work with lots of different government agencies to get it done. We had to do a public consultation, which included the supplement industry. So for a while, the supplement industry were rallying against us, and they had their own public campaign called Save Our Supplements. And they were making their own advertising campaigns against what we were doing. So going up against the supplement industry, you had to have an economic analysis done to show how much this would affect the Australian market and how much people were selling. And then it ultimately goes to the government in a different organisation to make that decision. And the way that we really influenced that decision was by talking about the health impacts of some of the ingredients that we're seeing in there, as well as the mental health impacts through people like Cassie telling their story. So all in all, that came into effect, I think, in 2020. And we're now doing another survey to see what the market looks like now. But when we go and randomly select products now, for example, if we find one that has a banned ingredient in it, we then report that to the Therapeutic Goods Administration. And if they're doing the wrong thing, then they will fine that company and potentially give any other penalties. And late last year, there was actually a supplement company who we worked to inform the TGA about what they were selling. They were selling a poison, they were selling SARMs, and that supplement company was fined $11 million. So that was Evolution Sups. And so that's the sort of penalties that they face if they break the regulations now. So $11 million to one supplement company is huge. They only operated online, I think, at the time, but it was kind of one of the first times that we saw these new rules in force and what could happen. So the last step in our supplement journey, I say last, but it's the athlete voice. Now, Cassie, whose video you saw earlier, I think she was in 2017. And when she first spoke to us and when we were dealing with her through the legal process, she came to us and said, I want to make sure this never happens to anybody ever again. What can I do? I want to be involved in education. And certainly her story was really harrowing, that it kind of spurred us into action more than any other that we'd kind of had. And I think that was because she was also a member of the Defence Force. So she almost lost her job because of the positive test as well. And again, this is somebody who had actually checked the ingredients online, but it was listed under a different thing. So it really spurred us into action, and listening to athletes go through that process can be really powerful. So we also found, well, with Cassie, for example, so her case was in 2017, but it took her about 2 years to be okay with what had happened to her, to be able to create that video with us. So we kept a relationship with her over the last however many years. We still work with her now. She's on our athlete advisory group, and she's been instrumental in helping to tell the athlete story, because when we go and talk to athletes, what we find is they might not listen to us, people like myself or my team, but they will listen to each other. So hearing Cassie's story has been really powerful, and I know that she's had a lot of people reach out to her to tell her and to thank her for telling the story that they've stopped taking supplements altogether. We've also started using the voice of parents for younger cohorts, because we know when it comes to supplement decision making, the parents play a really important role. So I've got another video, and Gobi, I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, but essentially what it is an athlete and his dad talking about how the supplement positive came about, and maybe we'll just send out this link with the other one, Gobi, to avoid any tricky points, if that works. But I guess the key takeaways for us and what we've learned over the last 5 years, like I said, it's been a journey. We tried some things, we hoped that they worked, but we weren't really sure whether they were to consider your agency's risk appetite in messaging. Ours, before 2016, we didn't have much risk appetite at all to change what we were saying about supplements. We just didn't want athletes to take them at all. So it took us a while to convince people to say, this is a problem that isn't going away. Athletes are still using supplements, and we need to help them reduce their risk when they do, because us trying to say don't take supplements just wasn't working, and wasn't representative of the lives that athletes were living. The second one was how important athletes' voices can be in your education programs, which I'm sure you all know and are already working on. But we do debriefs with every sanctioned athlete before they return back to sport, as I'm sure you guys do under ISE. And we try to make them really education focused and see if they have any interest in working with the education team in future to help prevent what happened to them happening to others. And generally you find that people are really positive about that. They genuinely, especially in the supplement case, they want to stop it happening to anyone else. Make it as simple as possible for athletes. So for us, that meant building the app. Obviously everyone can't build an app, which I completely appreciate. But is that a flyer that explains, steps that you can take, 5 steps to reduce your risk, whatever you can to translate whatever your message is into something really simple for athletes that they can use, particularly when they're going through the stage of buying a new supplement, can be really helpful. And we found that's been great. In terms of your partners, so for us, we wouldn't have been able to do the supplement regulation changes had we not engaged with our government partners. So seeing who makes the decisions and who you need to work with to influence for change is really important. And the last one was remember to evaluate your program, because had we not, we might not have known that we had 0. And that was just a pleasant surprise of doing the evaluation that we weren't really expecting. We also know that it's not going to be 0 forever. You know, there are going to be Australian athletes that do test positive. Our aim, our goal is to keep it at 0 for as long as we can, but we don't really want to take our foot off the pedal with education. And one of our concerns has been, if you know, telling sports about this, that they might start saying that supplements aren't a problem in Australia anymore, but they absolutely still are. So making sure that we don't relax on this and we continue to say we're striving for 0 is really important. And the last one was, obviously supplements have been our big focus for us over the last 5 years. Our next big one is SARMs. I don't know what you guys are facing around the world, but we are getting way too many positive tests as a result of SARMs. And that will be our next big challenge. And we haven't quite figured out how we're going to tackle it yet. But if anybody has ideas, then I would love to hear them as well. So I hope that gives kind of the journey that we've had with supplements. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alexis. I think it has been, am I still muted? No. Yeah, it has been very informative, and I'm sure that this is really, really useful to this part of the region. I've got a good number of questions that have come to me. All right. Probably I'll take you through one at a time. And meanwhile, if anybody else have any questions, please raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. Now, one question I had was, what is Australia's position on athletes being brand ambassadors for supplement brands?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one we've only just started to tackle. So athletes obviously do it. And what we know that we're not going to stop them from doing it, because a lot of athletes need money and income, and taking that away from them again seems out of touch with how athletes work. So what we're trying to do is actually teach them how to talk about supplements responsibly. So our advice is, if you are accepting a supplement sponsorship, make sure that they are batch tested. And actually we have an e-learning course that we publish each year, and this year we've actually given them an example of a post that does responsible supplement advertising. So for example, you know, yes, I'm sponsored by True Protein, they're batch tested. As an athlete, that's the only way I can go. And you know, make sure you seek nutritionist advice before taking something. So again, it's quite pragmatic. So accepting that athletes will accept sponsorship opportunities from supplement companies. They're a major sponsor of athletes. And then how do we shift them again to mitigate that risk a little bit? And again, if we can get more athletes talking about the need for batch testing or the need to speak to a dietitian, even better. But we do certainly say only batch tested companies.
Sure.
I do.
Sure. So there is no need for the athlete to come to you or their respective organization prior to going and endorsing a product or a company or being an ambassador.
Yeah, so they will have to talk to their sport about it typically, but they don't need to come to us unless they are one of our athlete educators. And at the moment, none of our athlete educators are sponsored by supplement companies. So
Great. The next question is with regards to your app. Who developed your app and who supported it? All right. And the length of time you've taken to develop your app.
Yes, more great questions. So we engaged a company to do the back-end technical build for us and the design of it. It took us, this is not representative of what would normally happen, but we managed to build it in, I think, 7 weeks.
Wow.
Because we were trying to launch it for the Commonwealth Games. And it's gotten bigger and bigger over the last 5 years. But originally it was just kind of the medication checker, the supplement checker, a feedback form and just some basic text. So simpler version back then. And we got the support from the Australian government. They were able to find some funding for us to support the purchase of that, or the build.
Great. The third question I have was, you have worked with the batch tested companies, all right? But I presume that you have not covered all the batch tested companies, right?
Correct.
So is there an intention, because there could be a product that has been batch tested, but it's not a company that whose plethora of products you have with you in your database. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It's definitely something that we thought about. So we decided to only work with those two companies because they were the only two ones who operated in Australia and sold their products on Australian shelves. And what we really wanted athletes not to do was to go online and buy supplements, because as soon as you go online, the market is riskier. So for us, we always want them to buy them from a shop in person. And so for that reason, that's why we only work with those two companies. It doesn't mean to say that there aren't other great batch testing companies that operate internationally. And certainly if an athlete is competing in another country, then we would tell them to go with that National Anti-Doping Organisation's advice, or to buy their supplements in Australia before they left.
Okay. Good. Anyone else have any questions? I do see some things coming out. No, okay.
Yes,
I'll just,
Mr. Gobin.
yes, Pak Gatot. Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Gobin. Thank you, Alexis. I would like to ask shortly. I'm sure that in Australia there is so-called as you mentioned before, as so-called what is the name? The institution of in America, Food and Drug Administration, and yes, and in Australia, is it proper for such institution to provide the what is called the information, for example, such supplement probably contain something related to the prohibited substance or something like that, but because in Indonesia we also have so-called the Food and Drug Administration, and last time we had a contact with them. Yes, Indonesia, it's impossible for them, and we do understand it's impossible to provide information on the supplement that it's not guaranteed that it include the prohibited substance or no. So what we have to do, because there are a lot of athletes sometimes raising question to IADO, to the NADO of Indonesia, how could we distinguish between the supplement consists of prohibited substance or no? What do we have to do in correlation to have a cooperation with so-called the Food and Drug Administration? Alexis, thank you.
Yeah, so I think if I've understood correctly, the challenge is that you can never really be 100% sure what's on the label. And the kind of second question was around the engagement with the Food and Drug Administration. So in Australia, ours is called the Therapeutic Goods Administration. They do something similar to the FDA. But that's actually because we got them reclassified to be medicines instead of being foods. And so once you get the medication compliance people involved, then they're much more strict about the label has to have what it says it must. So the way that they regulate it is much stronger than foods. And that's probably been the really big difference. So getting it away from the FDA equivalent into the medicine world has meant that you can have more confidence that what is on the label is actually there. Because there are some compliance checks, so random testing of things that are out there, and there's major penalties if they don't. Actually, if the ingredient list doesn't match what's actually in there, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Alexis, there's one more question that came in and says, due to the limited source to check risky supplements in this region, I talked about Southeast Asian region, a big number of athletes in our region have to use supplements. So I will reserve my comments on that, okay? Do you have any sources or website to check the risk supplement that can be used in the region? Does the supplement check of Australians app include supplements that comes out or produced from this region?
Ooh. So, I mean, possible. So if a product from the Asian region wants to sell their product in Australia, then they can go through that batch testing product. So there could very well be crossover between products that are made in Asia that then come into the Australian market and then get tested. I think the best thing to do would be for the Southeast Asia region, Rado, would be to look at what batch testing companies operate in your region. Gogi, you would know better. I assume Informed Sport sell things in the region. Understanding who you're, I mean, if you've got NSF certified, and then potentially creating that list for athletes to make sure, and the awareness around these are the logos that you're looking for, because these are the ones that operate in your markets or in your region, and getting those logos out to athletes as much as possible. That would be where we started. You know, what logos are we comfortable with? And then making sure athletes knew about them was our first step. So whichever ones operate in your region, and then making sure athletes know what they are.
Thank you, Alexis, because I know some of them in your countries is very unregulated. So from a NADO's point of view, I think it is a good start for you to start indicating about batch testing. Many of our athletes are not even aware in this region about batch testing. All right, so that's something NADO's can do. I got one more question for you. How does Australian government regulate products sold online?
I saw that one pop up and I'm not actually sure of the answer. I'm really sorry. I know that like we have a good arrangement with Border Force. So if things are coming from other countries and coming into Australia, sometimes things can be picked up, but I'm not actually sure about the online regulation. Sorry, I can get an answer from somebody else who's smarter than I am and get back to you.
If I could just add that, not very much performance enhancement drugs, but I think we have very strong drug laws in Singapore. And I do know the police force here work very closely with the online shoppers like Lazada or Shopee. And there have been instances where these online companies have given the tips to the police force and they have raided. One typical example I could give was someone growing weed in their house and they were caught. It's very open. The case was out and thought I'd just let you know with regards to that. Yeah. The next question, Alexis, you handle the sports fraternity. Is there any plans with regards to handling recreational athletes in the gym?
Ooh. So one of the things that we're looking, not yet, only because when we became Sport Integrity Australia only 2 years ago, we have doping and now we have all these other things. So like child safety, for example, it has kind of become our education front runner. So I would love to do something in the gyms, but I have to deal with lots of other integrity issues. But we are looking at a project with pharmacists. So trying to get people, because that's where a lot of supplements are sold in Australia. So educating the pharmacists so that then they can ask people, are you an athlete? If yes, these ones are a safer option for you.
Great.
So not gyms yet, but pharmacies.
Yeah, pharmacies. Yeah, I know 1 or 2 countries here working with the pharmacies. The rest you may want to look into it. There's one more question from Philippines. In Australia, given that there is a regulation, is batch testing considered a guarantee that the supplement is free from prohibited substances? Because there are instances of fakes and copies of supplements, at least in our part of the region. This happens both online and in store. And with this, does SIA strongly discourage the athletes from buying supplements from outside Australia to avoid contaminated supplements?
Yeah, these are such good questions. That's why I love these webinars so much. So we don't we tell athletes that it's not a 100% guarantee, that anytime they choose to use a supplement, they are taking a risk of some description. And it's whether they want to take a small risk by a batch tested product or a big risk by taking something picked off the shelf. So we tell them that we can't give them the 100% guarantee because the batch testing companies can only screen for the products that are on the WADA prohibited list. And one of the challenges with the prohibited list is obviously it says, you know, dimethylbutylalamine or products in a similar way, or that act in a similar way. But the batch testing company can only look for dimethylalbutamine because they know that that exists. So they can't test for absolutely everything that would be captured under the prohibited list. That's how we tell athletes that it's not 100%, which they seem to understand. But, you know, we monitor closely around the world as well whether anybody tests positive to a batch tested product. And if there was a positive test from a batch tested product, that would probably make us reassess our position, reassess our messaging, and all of that. But so far, it hasn't happened. Which brings me to the next part of your question, which is about fakes and copies. So we know that that can happen as well, and we've seen people make fake copies of the stickers. So for that reason, that's why we always make them look not just for the label, but then also check the batch number and the expiry date of that batch number to make sure it matches with the app. And the app also instructs them, and when we educate them, we say, make sure you take a screenshot of all the research that you've done, so that if you do test positive, at least you can say, well, I've used the app, I've checked the batch number, I've checked the expiry date, I've done everything humanly possible to reduce my risk. And then hopefully if it comes to a tribunal, they can, you know, have little to no sanction is the dream. Showing that they're a diligent athlete, I guess, is the
Thank you, Alexis. One more last point, which I thought it's also good to emphasize in this region. You spoke about change in messaging. And the idea is don't take supplements, because I was literally called up a couple of years ago after a presentation by a NADO and asking me, why do they just say don't take supplements? Our nutritionists and dietitians will know what to do. With the change in the messaging to supplements will never be 100% change, will be 100% safe. Now, having said that, in changing the message, who are the stakeholders you work with and what were their thoughts? And did you have any stakeholders who actually gave you a hard time in the message?
Great question. So we worked mainly just internally, and we consulted with some of our sporting organisations to see what they thought of it. This was 5 years ago. So if I was doing it again now, I would consult with dietitians, nutritionists, probably with WADA, probably with all of you. But I was very new in the job back then. So we worked internally and with some sports and with athletes. So we actually spoke to Cassie, for example, and said, would this help? Do you think this would be useful? So that was really good feedback. The sticking point at the time was our legal team, who really didn't, they were worried that if we said, you know, take one of these batch tested products and then an athlete tested positive to one of them, or if we relaxed our stance on supplements, if an athlete then tested positive, that risk was too great for our agency, for our reputation, what would happen if we went to a tribunal. And so there was lots of back and forth internally with our legal team, essentially. And, you know, our CEO got involved at the time as well, to make sure that we were all really happy to change that messaging. And I'm really glad we did. And I think they are as well now as well. So
great, fantastic. Anyone else have any other questions? Because I think there's a lot of take-home messages here, whether you are working with your pharmaceutical organization, if you're working with your nutritionists, dietitians, and I think Alexis gave a very good message that you need to work with these people so that we send the right message. And also with regards to the changes, the changing in messaging, because countries in the region still go by the term say no to doping. I think we have advocated there that word say no to doping itself is have a very negative connotation. And that is why WADA has also moved its stand, instead of saying no to doping, to clean sport. Yeah. I had one more question. I think we buy all our products from mainly UK and US. Wait, let me see. Sharing that in our region, there are very few limited batch tested products. We buy all our products from overseas, mainly UK and US, no guarantee. Our buying power is small, but if we as a region can educate our athletes, we can increase our demand, buying power, allow more companies to want to sell batch tested products in our region. I fully agree with you. Lian is our head dietitian from the Singapore Sports Institute. Lian, I fully agree with you. I think that is something which we really hope countries can work together and to see how we can make an impact. Since Lian has brought this, I also like to highlight that we will be having an Asia-Oceania Anti-Doping Education Symposium in the end of July. And we hope to see whether these people in the supplementation industry or batch testing industry could come in and also provide some support and see how something can happen in the region. No promises, but we all start with a dream. Okay, so I think that's all I have. If not, please join me in thanking Alexis. Give a big clap around. And before we go off, can we have all your video on so we can get Sui to take a photograph? I think it's a very good turnout. We really love 80 people coming over, including our stakeholders, nutritionists, dietitians. Thank you for taking your time. All right, can we have all your video on? And Sue, I think I'll leave it to you to take the photographs.
Thank you. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
Did you capture all? She's still smiling.
Okay.
Right. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we will keep you posted with regards to any more webinars coming along the way. All right. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
If you could just hold on, Alexis.
Yeah,
I hope
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gobi.
Present today.
Thank you, guys. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.